So I decided back then that I was probably going to end up a dirty old man. I was probably going to end up this perverted, ugly thing that was just not going to be fit for human habitation. And that addiction grew and grew and grew and grew, and the less connected and the less loved I felt in my family, the more I was drawn to the addiction, because it was a band-aid for the pain I was feeling. And then before I knew it, my whole life was in the grip of this horrible thing called pornography. Now, I don't shy away from that, because 80% of the world consumes pornography, and of that 80%, 20% become addicted. And I've spent the last 18 years working with men who have a porn addiction to stop them from killing themselves. Because my addiction became so bad that on the 18th of August 2006, I made a decision that I was going to end my life. I was planning it in advance. I was going to make it look like an accident. I was going to make sure the insurance was paid up, that my family would be financially secure, but they wouldn't have me around to infect their lives anymore. And the world would be a better place. And so I was racing with joy in my heart to the freedom of suicide. And I was one of many men in that same position, because in Australia, my friends, 4 times more men than women kill themselves every day. 4 times. 7 times more women than men talk about it but don't do it. Why? Because they talk about it. Men don't. We can't. Because we do, we admit a weakness, and we can't afford to look weak because we'll be taken advantage of. And like all the males in the prides of lions and the herds of cattle and everything, the weaker males get forced out. And it's like that in our thinking, and we can't afford to be that way. And so with no one to talk to, my life went down the gurgler. And then as I got close to that moment, within days of that suicide, I was going on my last flight as a Qantas captain before I went on a period of leave during which I was going to end my life. And it was a flight from Brisbane to Perth, overnight in Perth for 24 hours, come back the next day on the red eye. And it was on that flight that when I went to the bathroom at 38,000 feet, the woman coming out of the bathroom before I was about to use it was Michelle. And I met her at 38,000 feet. I had to pinch myself to breathe, and I remember looking at her, she was so beautiful, I'm going... And we had a conversation for 15 minutes that changed both of our lives, and we met together the next day. We spent the whole day together, and 6 weeks later she'd moved to the Gold Coast. I'd sorted my life out, and I didn't kill myself, and my life has exploded with relevance ever since. And she's the angel that God sent to bring me back from the brink. And so, I remember feeling like I was right leaning over the edge of the cliff, ready to freefall. And a hand came into my belt and pulled me back, and pulled me close to his face and said, "Not now. I've got something better for you to do." And here I am. And here we are. And it was amazing. And my whole life has been incredible ever since that day. It's been frightening. It's been a roller coaster. It's been exhilarating. But as the line in the movie Parenthood goes, some people love the merry-go-round because it just goes round and round. But the roller coaster is so exciting because you feel the fear and the terror and the joy and the exhilaration all in one ride. And that's what the last 18 years has been like for us. And it's been a journey of incredible learning for both of us. And I've realised that being brought back from the edge of going over the cliff was that important, that I needed to share my experience with other men who I knew were feeling just like I did. And so I started looking at, why did I get that close? How could somebody, I'm reasonably intelligent, how could somebody in that position, with everything going for them, like the fancy house and the big income and the 4 gold bars and the gold wings, and everything in my life looked good, although you could drive a truck through the hole in my soul that no one could ever see. How could someone get that close? And so I did a lot of thinking about it, a lot of study. I talked to old men and I talked to young men, and I looked at the reasons why I was like I was, and I wondered how we could make this a better place. And so that's why I'm appealing to the men. It's vital. This appeal is something you must not let go. And so when the Industrial Revolution happened and all the men were sucked out of the family unit, and the village rather, they were also sucked out of the family unit as well. And as a result, the villages were vulnerable to attack, and the villages were vulnerable to failure. And so they felt less secure, and therefore they were much easier to coerce. And so then we decide that in order for the Industrial Revolution to be successful, we need a war. And in 1914, 10 million men in uniform went to war, and only 4 million came back. And those who came back were armless, legless, blind, insane, suffering from PTSD, which in those days they called shell shock. And if you look at the old newsreel footages, you'll see men like that. It's just, imagine, there are some places in Europe, in Ypres for example, where 16,000 heavy artillery shells an hour rained down on one concentrated area. How men survived that is beyond me. I mean, it was just a miracle that they survived. And all those things were happening. And so those men who came back, who were meant to be mentoring the young boys into manhood, and those young boys had already lived through the terror of war, wondering whether their fathers or their brothers had come home, they couldn't even raise a tomato bush, let alone raise a healthy boy to become a healthy man. And then as a result of what happened in World War I, the Treaty of Versailles imposed restrictions on Germany, which meant that they had to pay damages to all of Europe. So their economy flattened, and people were starving by the hundreds of thousands in the streets of their cities. And the soup they were drinking in the cauldrons that you see in the newsreels in the early 1920s, that was dirty water boiling dirty potato skins with a handful of salt in it. They were killing each other over a potato that might have rolled off the back of a truck. It got really bad. And the people of Germany were the most educated, articulate and sophisticated people of Europe. The people of Germany are incredible. And, you know, Hitler thought that, didn't he? He said they were the master race. But the people, you know, you look at anything German made, it's good. They do everything very well. And the German people then were looking for a hero. And the only hero they could find was the trumped up little corporal with the funny moustache. And that off Hitler rose to power. And he rose to power on a platform of, I want to make Germany great again. I want you to think of the comparisons. And everyone said, yeah, that's what we need. We need to support him. We need to follow him. We need to lift him up. And they did. And he gave them their jobs back. He gave them their homes back. He fed them. He educated their children. He even gave them a portable mantelpiece radio with a swastika on it to put on their mantelpiece to hear the propaganda at 6 o'clock every night. Every single one of them had propaganda in their homes. Ringing any bells? The 11 o'clock news conferences. And in the street the next day, a brown shirt could come up to you and say, what did you hear Hitler say on the radio last night? Oh, he talked about the prosperity of the Navy and how we're building a fleet. Oh, good. If you didn't know, you got beaten up. Or that you might have disappeared. And they kept an eye on people. And people were dobbing in their neighbours. I'm not trying to draw a comparison much. And then there were things going on that sort of, everyone was enjoying this new normal in Germany. And the people were saying, why are they burning the books at the university? Shut up, Otto, don't talk about it. Maybe they're cold, maybe they want to get warm. What are they doing with the professors and the academics? Why are they taking the Jews? Shut up, will you? You'll get us all in trouble. Don't you like the new life? Don't you like the new normal? Forget about it, will you? And collectively, 80% of the population of Germany looked the other way. Because they liked the new normal. Ringing any bells? And then as a result of all the horrors that happened within Germany and Europe and the invasion of Poland, the world went to war again. And 53 million people were killed. And another 10 million men in uniform went to war and only 4 million came back. And those who came back were armless, legless, blind and insane. And they couldn't raise a tomato bush, let alone raise a healthy boy to manhood. And then we had Korea, and then we had Vietnam, then we had the war on terror, we had Iraq, Afghanistan, and the cycle continues. And during the whole cycle of history since then, boys have had no one to raise them in the proper format to become who God intended them to be. Heroes who were made in his image to be hunters, gatherers and protectors. To be creating families with beautiful women who were made in his image to be mothers, homemakers and nurturers. It's beautiful when it works together. It's beautiful when there's mutual love and respect between the man and the wife. The whole concept of becoming one flesh in marriage is beautiful, especially when it's wrapped around the central cord of Jesus Christ. It's wonderful. I live in a marriage like that. It's a joy. We smile every morning when we wake up. Every morning when we wake up, we look at each other and we wonder what we can do today to make each other feel more loved than we did yesterday. Oh, it's a joy. To come from wanting to kill yourself to that is like jumping out of the sauna into an ice bath. And so, this is what brings people together to destroy the effects of fear. So if a good country is made up of good communities, if a good country which is well spiritually, mentally, emotionally and physically, it is made up of good communities that are made up of individuals who are healthy spiritually, mentally, emotionally and physically, and that's made up of family units that are made up of people who are healthy physically, mentally, emotionally and spiritually, which is made up of individual people who are physically healthy, mentally, And so, we've got to restore that balance. So how do we do it? The men have to come back. We have to redefine all the things that we've thought about. I came up with a saying when I first started ministering to men, that if the recipe for a good man required the ingredients to be left in the oven for an hour and a half, most of us were taken out in an hour. We look done on the outside, crispy and brown, but when you put the skewer in, there's no substance and we collapse. We often wonder why the big spotted gum fell over on a calm day 3 days after a big storm. And when we go and look at the tree lying in the paddock, we see that it's hollow on the inside. It's been eaten out. It looks strong, but there is no substance to it. I used to sit on a big log in the back garden of our home on the Gold Coast when I was counselling men, many of whom drove 4 hours to come and sit with me. And the log was really high, and when you sat on it, your feet were like that, you couldn't touch the ground. And during the break, in between their tears, I'd tap the log and I'd say, "What do you think about this log? It's massive, isn't it?" They go, "Yeah, what is it?" And I say, "Oh, it's Australian cedar." "Wow. Yeah, it's huge." I say, "How heavy do you think it would be?" "Oh, I'd have to weigh 4 or 5 tonne, wouldn't it?" I said, "Yeah, you reckon? Get up and have a look at the end of it." When they looked at the end of it, it was a pipe you could crawl through. It was that thick all the way around. Eventually collapsed under my weight. But I'd say, they'd always look at me and laugh and say, "Wow, that's deceiving, isn't it?" And I'd look back at them and say, "Yeah, but that's you, isn't it? That's how you feel." Every single one of them burst into tears. Every single one. And I'm with them because I knew how they felt. We're in a very slippery path. We're becoming used to a narrative that's been pushed through the media, that all men are bastards, men can't be trusted, women can do 10 things well at this one time and you can't get a man to have a decent thought. And we're being denigrated and denigrated and denigrated. All the domestic violence appears to be man-related. The family courts seem to favour, in most cases, against the man. And we're seeing domestic violence go through the roof. We're seeing murder-suicides of families being destroyed by a man who's lost the plot. And all of them go back to one central tenet, and that is that they don't feel loved, they don't feel connected, they don't feel worthwhile, they don't feel valuable, they don't feel they can commit to anything, and they're useless and helpless and hopeless. And that's a tragic story. A lot of us carry a wound deep in our heart that relates to the fact that we never got shown what to do by our dads. And it's really tragic. And I've spent a lot of time with a lot of men talking about those issues. And I understand how it happens. Jesus took me on a journey through my past when I became a Christian. And he said, "Let's go for a walk." And he took me back to the caravan when I was sick in bed as a kid and I'd found that magazine. And he said, "Look at you." And I'd look and I'd think, how horrible. That one moment, he said, destroyed all your destiny because you had no one to talk to, you had no one to help you through it. You didn't even know me then, although I was there watching you. And he said, your whole life has been a result of that one thing that happened. And he said, I want you to know that that's the reason why your life has gone the way it has. But it's not an excuse to continue. And the Bible says that when a father does the wrong thing, that the sins of the father are visited on the next 3 or 4 generations. That's not God being a punishing dictator to make sure that your family suffers because of you. That's God knowing that it takes the human soul sometimes 4 or 5 generations to break the chain of abuse that happens. That's how it works. But we can change that. We can become chain breakers today. You can break the chain right now. And I've seen it happen to so many men. We had a couple come to us for couples counselling, one of the 400 that we've done. They came from Western Australia to be with us for a weekend on the Gold Coast. And when they turned up, we put them in their accommodation, they walked into the kitchen of our home, and Michelle was doing a beautiful lamb roast. And Friday night was always where we normally sat through an argument of the couple who came, and we could work out where all the rubbish was and what we had to clean up. And Michelle was really good at asking targeted questions when they walk in the door. And this couple were very interesting because the guy was a classic narcissist. He always had a beard his whole life. Not that that's significant of a narcissist. I don't want to interview bearded blokes getting ready to hit me. But that was his thing. Was he always had a beard his whole life. He was aggressive. He was sarcastic. He was controlling. And his wife was frumpy and round-shouldered and like this. And he was full of it. And he rang me the week before and he said, "Oh, we're coming over to your place for the weekend now. I just want to word you up, mate, you know, I need to tell you what my wife's all about because there's a few things you're going to have to deal with her. She does this, she does that, she doesn't understand this, she doesn't understand that." And immediately I thought, I know who the problem is, where the problem is, and it ain't her, right? You could see it in my life, couldn't you? And so they turned up and they walked into our kitchen to have to meet us and to have dinner. Michelle said to both of them, and he always answered the question. She never got a chance to speak. And she said, "How many kids you got, guys?" And he said, "I've got one daughter and 2 disappointments." Oh. And she went, and we said, "What's that about?" "Oh, I've got a beautiful daughter, but I've got 2 sons who divorced me. They went to court and actually divorced away from my name, so they don't carry my name." I said, "What was that about?" "Oh, you know, when I left my wife, one of the times I left her, there were some wheels and tyres in the garage and they sold them to get money for something. And I had them charged with theft." I said, "Okay, interesting." Anyhow, the whole weekend did not go to plan. Normally we get a break, we find out what the problems are on a Friday night. By lunchtime on the Saturday, we're finally getting somewhere. And by lunchtime on Sunday, they leave fairly happy. And they all say the same thing. "We can't believe how easy the fixes were and we can't believe how good we feel." And it's been really good, and we know, we give them the tools and we keep in touch with them and make sure they're doing okay. But by nearly midnight on a Saturday night, we still hadn't had a breakthrough, and we were getting really frustrated. And I remember leaning back with Michelle in the couch, as they were sitting on the couch opposite us, and they were arguing, and we were praying loud in this voice, "God, give us strength. What are we going to do? How do we get a breakthrough in this?" And then there was a pause in the conversation. And this question came to mind that I had to ask him, that I hadn't preempted. I looked at him and I said, "What's the worst thing you've ever done to your wife?" And he looked at me and looked at her and he said, "Yeah, I'm in a safe place. I've got nothing to lose." "Yeah, I remember." And she's looking at him like what's going to come out of her mouth. And he said, "Yeah, we never get on, we fight all the time and everything, and she annoys me." And one night after we had an argument, she was lying facing the wall snoring. And I thought to get even with her, I got up and I urinated into her mouth. Oh. And she looked at him like, "You what?" She didn't know. And I had the same reaction that you had. I'm sorry to be so graphic, but I think it's really important that we understand just how low people can go in their despair. And I said, "You're a dog." In fact, I take that back. I love dogs. You're lower than a snake's belly in a gutter. And he bristled up. He's a man in his early 50s. And he bristled up and he started to rise out of his seat to come and hit me. And I said to him, "Sit down and shut up. Just sit there for a minute and shut up and listen to what I've got to say." And he sat down and he was seething. And I said, "I know you're a dog because I used to be a dog, but I was never that bad." And I said, "This is what else I know. You know you're a dog and you don't like it, do you?" And he just stared at me, seething. And I said, "If you died today and your funeral was next week, this is what it would look like. Half a dozen men you work with in the church with their yellow reflective shirts on during the lunch break. Your wife's surrounded by half a dozen women who are hugging her saying, don't worry, you're free now, he's gone. And your sons would be at the pub getting drunk, celebrating that you're no longer around to infect their lives. And he just went. But I said, if you get it right today, and you face the music, and you break the chain, and you stand up as a man, and you die in 3 years' time, the church will be packed with people who admired you. Your wife would be grieving that after 34 years she finally got the man she always wanted, but now he's gone. And your sons would stand at the pulpit in suits giving a glowing eulogy about the man who learned from his mistakes and made good. And he just looked at me. And I said, which one of those funerals do you want? He said, I want the last one. I said, what are you going to do to get it? What are you going to do to get it? And I said, we're exhausted. Go off to your room. We'll see you in the morning at 7:30. 7:30 the next morning came. Michelle's making the breakfast. Love your cap. Michelle's making the breakfast. They walk in. They look different. She's square-shouldered. They've got their arms around each other. Something looked different about him. Michelle said, what's different? And she said, he shaved his beard off. And we said, oh yeah, you got no beard. And he's smiling. And we said, what happened? She said, I woke up half an hour ago and he was kneeling beside the bed, looking at me. And I noticed he had no beard. And I said, what have you done? He said, I got up at 2 o'clock this morning and shaved it off. She said, why did you do that? I've never seen you clean shaven. He said, I don't want you to ever wake up and see that face ever again. This is how easy it is to turn the dice. It's how easy to change the climate, is to face the facts. So then we spent the rest of the day talking about what made him like he was. Tell me about your father. Don't talk to me about my father. Why? Mongrel. He used to belt me every night with his belt buckle, and sometimes he'd knock me unconscious. I used to see stars. He said, I've still got scars on my torso where he put his cigarette out on my belly when I was a kid. I said, wow, my father was a mongrel. What do you know about his history? Oh, a little bit, not much. What do you know? What was he like? What were the things? What things happened in his life? He said, he went off to the Korean War. I said, okay, what do you know about that? Well, at his funeral, one of his mates that went to war with him told me a few things that happened. I said, like what? He said, well, he was in a trench that froze over on the frontier. And 3 of his mates froze to death. And he said another occasion he was in a bunker and a mortar round went off and 3 of his mates had their heads blown off. And I said, whoa. He said, yeah, it's pretty gruesome, isn't it? I said, oh man. I said, what was he like before he went to war? Did your mum ever say? My mum said he was the life of the party. Everyone loved my dad. I never got to see that side of him. But everyone said he was great. I said to him, how do you reckon you would have gone living through your dad's life? Like, you put yourself in his shoes, how would that have gone for you? How would you have been in those trenches? Oh, he said, I'd probably made a bigger mess of it than he did. I said, you reckon? He said, yeah, I never thought about that. I said, do you think it's time to forgive your dad? How do I do that? Think about it. How can you? Was he doing the best he could with what he had? I said, have you been doing the best you could with what you had? He said, what have I had? I said, abuse from your father. He said, I could do a lot better. I said, so maybe it's time to forgive your dad. He said, you may be right, I need some help in working on that, and we did. And after they went back to Perth, we saw photos on Facebook months later of he and his sons reunited. They all went to a family holiday in Darling. And every time we preached at a church over there, he would always come along, sometimes from work with his yellow shirt on. He'd always sit and listen to what I had to say. He didn't believe in God, but he liked to hear what I had to say. And we saw a dramatic change in that guy. And I've seen that in dozens of men. So how do we get there? How do we get from that position to where we can fill the breach? Well, I look at my own dad. My own dad was a gregarious kind of guy. Everyone loved him. He was a great guy, but he wasn't the best father. He was never present. But how could he be? His own father killed took his own life when he was 14. And he spent 7 years of those 14 years of my dad's life in prison. So, you know, who did my dad have to raise him? And my dad used to tell me he loved me every now and then, but every time he did, it was conditional. I really love you, son, but can you get me a beer? I really love you, son. I'll love you even more if you mow the lawn on Sunday. And stuff like that. And I always felt, I don't know that you love me or not, because you're never around when I need you, and my emotional needs were never met by my father. My mum tried to, but she found it too difficult. And I grew up in their dysfunction, as I said. But then there came a time in my life when my life was really on the rocky side as I approached suicide, and my dad saw me going through these dark phases. And when I met Michelle, he was incredibly happy to see me change. There was something different. And during that change process, when he was embracing the new me, I said to him, I've got some news for you. And he said, what's that? I said, I've just become a Christian. And he went off his face. Ah, no. You're going to be a Bible-bashing wowser. Every time I open a beer, you're going to want to read scripture to me, you're going to look at me and shake your head. Every time we sit down and have a conversation, if I drop a swear word, you're going to open the Bible and read me why I shouldn't be doing it. I said, I'm not going to do that. You will. I said, I'm not. And it got really heated. And I said, all right, look, I promise I'll never open a Bible in front of you ever again. Is that all right? You will. You Christians, you can't help yourselves. I said, I won't, okay? Yeah, I believe it when I see it. And so we agreed to disagree. And then as the years went by, he went into a nursing home. And I used to bring him home every Friday because I'm a Sabbath keeper and I worship God on Saturdays. I worship him every day, but our Sabbath day is Saturday. And my dad, I'd bring him home on a Friday and spend the day from the nursing home, and he'd sit in the wheelchair. And every 2 hours in between jobs I was doing at home, I'd come up and wheel him around the veranda, do a couple of laps. And as we walked past the kitchen window where Michelle was making us a cup of tea, I'd lean down and whisper into his ear, really love you, Dad. I really love you too, son. And one day he says to me, sit down. I've been thinking about you a lot. I want to talk to you. And I sat next to him and he said, you remember that time when you were 17 and you had that old boat that you did up, you blew it up, exploded with you on it? I said, yeah, I remember. He said, nearly killed you, didn't it? I said, yeah, nearly did. I remember not long after that I lent you the money to buy that flash car and you wrote it off in the first week and you never paid me back. I said, I paid you back. He said, no, you didn't. I said, yes, I did. Remember the crazy Scottish bird you were going out with? Yeah. Where did you get her from? I said, Scotland. Remember the time I came home drunk that night and abused your mum? Which time was that, Dad? Remember the time she wanted to impress me, so she dyed her hair black to look like Sophia Loren, and when I came home, your brother and I didn't like it, so we held her over the tub in the laundry and shaved her hair off while she screamed. I said, yeah, Dad, I was only that high. I said, what are you doing, you silly old fella? Are you trying to relive your life in slow motion replay? Are you trying to tick all the boxes before you die? And he said, I haven't got enough time left to do that. But he said, I do have one job I've got to do. And he looked me straight in the eye and he patted me on the knee and he said, I want to tell you something, boy. You're 10 times better a man and 10 times better a father than I ever was. Whoa. And he pointed to the sky and he said, and I thank God for that. So you're thanking God? He said, yeah. I said, why? He said, he's done a powerful work in you, whatever it is. I said, so you're a Christian now? No. How could I be? Where would I start? I said, do you want to be? What do you mean? I said, are you prepared to accept Jesus before you die? Because that's what's worked in me, it's Jesus. He said, I want what you've got. Before you die? Yeah. But where do I start? I said, you just did. And I started laughing. He said, what are you laughing at? I said, do you know, in my belief, that when you die, it's only one more sleep. And when you wake up, you're going to be fit, strapping, bronzed Aussie. And I will be too. And I'll have 4 or 5 less chins and a couple less bellies. And we'll be surrounded by beautiful people in the prime of their existence, walking around the sea of glass, preparing to dine at a never-ending feasting table with Jesus Christ. We'll have no pain, no want, no fear, no shame, no guilt. and eternal life looking at the universe. He said, is that how it works? I said, that's what I believe. Wow, where do I sign? I said, you just did. And I said, do you want to accept Jesus? He said, I do. So I prayed with him, hugged him, went on with the day. 3 months later, we get the call to go to the nursing home. Your father's dying. So we raced to the nursing home flat out, ran down the hallway to the door to his room. The door was open, there was a ceiling fan going around. It was a stinking hot morning at 11 a.m. on the Gold Coast, and sitting beside the bed where he was stretched out with a sheet tucked under his chin was my stepmum and the palliative care nurse who was holding his hand. His mouth was moving with every breath like a goldfish. And his eyes were wide open and piercing and looking at the ceiling fan going round and round and round. And I could smell the fear in him. And as I looked at him, the nurse looked at me and she said, you're too late, I'm sorry, he's lapsed into a coma, he won't even know you're here. And Michelle, being an RN, has been through many situations like that. She said, he'll know you're here. And so when he heard my voice in the door, I saw his eyes flicker and I raced to his side. And I looked into his eyes and he was definitely looking at me. And his eyes were piercing blue. And I said, you're afraid, aren't you, mate? And he blinked again. And as I brushed the hair back off his forehead, he had thick snowy white hair, and I brushed the hair back, and his forehead felt like cold porcelain, smooth and cold. And I said to him, don't be afraid, Dad. Remember, just one more sleep. Remember that story. And when you wake up, remember that vision. And he blinked again. And I said, there's something I've got to tell you. I said, you're the best father I could have ever had. Being your son has been a great honour for me. And I've always loved you. I've always respected you. And I can't wait to spend eternity with you in heaven. And with that, the old man in the coma trembled violently. And as the bed shook, his arm that was resting underneath the sheet, his right arm trembled. He brought it out under the sheet with every ounce of energy. He pushed his hand on my face and held it there for 10 seconds while it shook. And then it stopped trembling, slipped off my face and fell beside the bed. And he was dead. Gone. So what? The old man died. But before he died, with every ounce of energy he had, he made a gesture to me that proved to me that every time I was a kid and he said he loved me, he actually meant it. And I got it right here. Right here. And I'm a better man for that. And I realised as he lay there dead that I needed him to tell me when I was about 12 or 13 that I had what it took to be a good man. I've given you the best I've had, I can give you some. You're going really well. You're growing up to be a solid man. You're going to be okay. But he didn't know how to do that because no one did it for him. And he needed me before he died to tell him that he'd done all the right things. That's a circle of manhood under God. We need our fathers when we're young. They need us before they die. That's how this works. There's a balance in it that's beautiful. Everything in Christ is circular. Everything we give is meant to be given out and it comes back bountifully. That's what I love about faith. Standing here looking at your faces while I talk fills me with such joy. People ask me, why are you doing this? Is it for money? No. Because if I got paid basic wage for the hours we're putting in, I'd still earn more than we're getting now. But God meets our needs. It's not about money. Is it about ego? Forget that. I've told you that I've had a pornography addiction. I've told you all about my darkest secrets. Ego is the enemy to most men. And I've recognised I've got an ego warning light that goes off and I'm around people who are acting out of their ego and when I act out of my own ego. And I don't like it and I remain humble as much as I possibly can. And it's very difficult to do that, especially in this situation I find myself in now. But the one thing I'm grateful to God is that every time people come up and say, I want a photo with you, I want to hug you, you're my hero and all of that, I don't get puffed up, I get smaller. And I deflect it all straight up to heaven because if it wasn't for him and what he gives me, I wouldn't even be sitting here now. So why am I here? I'm here because I love my country. And I'm here because my dad fought for 5 years to give us freedoms that we've given up for smashed up on toast. I never got a chance to wear a uniform to defend my country and to do the right thing. I never got a chance to prove myself as a man until now, at age 70. I never got a chance. But I'm doing it like he did it because I love my country, not like a Christian ultra-nationalist. None of that rubbish. I love our way of life. And our way of life consists of the people that live in this country that enjoy that way of life with me. So if I love my country, that means I love its people, and that means that I love you. And that's why I'm here. It's love that brings me here. It's compassion and love. And I won't be swayed from that. And what people think of me is none of my business. I don't care. I'm here because I love you. And I may not even like half of you. But I've realised in my life lately especially that the things we don't like about people are driven, their behaviours are driven by pain in their lives that we know nothing about. And I really believe that it's easier to love somebody than it is to like them. And people have disagreed with me on that. One of my neighbours said, "That's rubbish. How can you love somebody you don't like?" I said, "I do." He said, "Who?" I said, "You." I said, "There are times when I don't much like your behaviour, but I love you." And he said, "Well, I couldn't love anybody I don't like." I said, "You do." He said, "I do not." He said, "Who?" I said, "Your son. Your son's had 5 kids to 4 different women, and you can't stand his behaviour, but if he came into your house tonight, you'd embrace him, wouldn't you?" He cried, because it's true. And I want you to imagine that while you've been sitting here, some invisible force has come and tattooed your darkest secret, your greatest fear on your forehead for everyone to see. And you don't know until you look around and you look at the person next to you and you see gambler, or you see porn addict, or you see wife beater, or you see thief. And you're looking and all these people have got this darkness written on their forehead. And you're thinking, "Oh, I always knew that about you." And then you realise that you're seeing what's written on their forehead because they're looking at what's written on your forehead. So what's written on your forehead? Everybody has got something written on their forehead. And we try and cover it with a fancy car so we look good. We try and cover it in church by wearing a really good suit with a leather-bound Bible under our arm. We try and cover it with a fancy house and a Facebook page with 1 million followers. It doesn't mean anything. And after half an hour of looking at each other's foreheads, you'd all burst out laughing. Because you'd all realise you're just the same as each other. You're just as broken as one another. And you'd laugh because of all the energy and all the money and all the time you've wasted trying to look like something that you weren't. But in the eyes of God, you're everything. He died because you're everything. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. There are 1,000 white crosses, 100,000 white crosses on foreign battlefields around the world with dead Australians under them who died to sacrifice their lives so you and I wouldn't have to have meetings like this. And there was a hill outside Jerusalem where one big wooden cross stood as an emblem for sacrifice that others may live. And most of us have given all that up for nothing. What was it for? Why did Christ bleed on the cross? For what? So that evil could reign? Why did those men and women, why did they lay under those white crosses on foreign battlefields? Imagine what it was like for them. Imagine how tough it would have been to sit on the fantail of a steamer sailing away from Albany in 1915, looking at the cliffs of Albany for the last time you'd ever see your homeland, before getting off on the boats at Gallipoli. Those young boys wouldn't have known which way was up. But the call came out and they were there. And one of the most beautiful gifts I've been given on the tour so far was a World War I bugle presented to me by the people of Ballarat. It had a canvas handle stitched around it, hand-stitched by the trooper who owned it. And it served at Gallipoli and it served on the Western Front. And that bugle blew the charge that sent how many hundreds of that man's friends to their deaths? For freedom they died. For truth they died. And it was all a big con, we know that. It was all the global elite playing their games and men were sacrificed. But they didn't know that. They went there with truth in their hearts and a spirit to keep this country alive. And we've walked away from it. We've given it all up. And so how do we get it back? How do we find the courage? Well, how did they find the courage? Let's see what floods through our veins. Let's go on a quick history lesson. The last great cavalry charge in history was at Beersheba, the Australian Light Horse. The horses were so thirsty they could smell the water in the wells. They couldn't go another 24 hours without water. The horses decided to charge. And Harry Chauvel just said to the bugler, blow the charge, because we can't stop the horses. And they charged at Turkish guns. The Turks were so afraid they forgot to lower their sights. And as the soldiers came closer and closer, they just overran the Turks. 32 Australians were killed, and they took the wells at Beersheba. And then we go to World War I, and we forget that in the spring offensive of 1918, when the Germans were sweeping through the continent, forcing Allied soldiers into retreat to the French coast to evacuate to England, General Haig said, get everyone off the continent, we've lost. And as they were all marching flat out back towards the coast with the Germans rolling them up like a carpet in the hallway, General Sir John Monash, one of the greatest generals that ever lived, rang his 2IC, Pompey Elliott, and said, Pompey, we didn't come all this way to retreat. Haig's not going to like this, but have the boys got one more fight left in them? He said, they're itching for a blue boss, let them go. And he said, get them to fix bayonets and get them to go back to Villers-Bretonneux. Because if we can hold that town, we hold the bridgehead, the railhead and the crossroads, and we bottle the Germans up, and we win. So the order went back through the retreating lines. Every Australian soldier fixed bayonets and go back to Villers-Bretonneux. And with 10 rounds of ammunition per man, they went back and they towed up the Germans. The Germans were terrified when they heard the Aussies were coming because their bayonets were 6 inches longer than the rest of the armies of the world that were there. And the Australian soldiers always laughed and screamed when they jumped into the trenches. And the Germans thought they were demon-possessed. And by dawn the next day, they held Villers-Bretonneux, and the Germans never won another battle, and that was the end of World War I for the Germans. And it was said of Monash that if he'd been the commander-in-chief of the armies on Europe, it would have been over in 18 months with 10% of the casualties. We forget that the first army to roll up the Germans in the Second World War was in North Africa at El Alamein, and then later when they held the garrison at Tobruk, Australians. When Rommel went back after losing North Africa because the Aussie rats at Tobruk held the ground there, Hitler said to him in a meeting, in a debriefing, what could I have given you to help you keep North Africa? He said a division of Australian soldiers would have been handy. That's historical fact recorded. And the Germans went downhill from that defeat at Tobruk. Everything started to go south for the Germans. And we forget about that time in history in World War II, that the first army to roll back the Japanese advance in Southeast Asia was the Australian army at Milne Bay. A ramshackle bunch of boys. And 77 Squadron RAAF Kitty Hawk fighters that were flying missions to protect the airbase. They had to keep the airbase from the Japanese. And the young boys flying those planes were flying in their pyjamas, because they had dysentery and malaria, and every time they went up to fight they crapped themselves, and the pyjamas dried quicker, and the men on the ground, every time the pilots pull up to refuel and rearm, they'd throw a bucket of water in the bottom of the cockpit to wash all the garbage out of the cockpit, and they would go up again. And when they ran out of fuel and they couldn't fly up to meet the Japanese, they decided to get the soldiers to push the tails backwards and forwards while they sprayed the jungle around the airfield with machine gun and cannon fire. And they held the Japanese, and the Japanese lost after that. And they got defeated at Kokoda, and it was all over for the Japanese. And if they hadn't done that, Townsville would have been a Japanese colony in 2 months. We forget. And we forget the army, the company of men in Long Tan, in a rubber plantation in Vietnam, that held off 10 North Vietnamese divisions. 18 of them died, and the youngest was 19. We forget. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning we will remember them. Every Anzac Day, April 25th, we get up early in the morning. We think we've sacrificed a good night's sleep to get up and remember these boys. And then we go and enjoy the rest of the holiday. Lest we forget. We forgot. The rest of Australia has forgotten. And we've got to come back to sacrifice. And we have to redefine the word hero if men are going to come back into the breach, because you're not meant to be like Shane Warne. Shane Warne was a good spin bowler, a great spin bowler, who got laid a lot by pretty women and could handle his drive. I want my son to be like Shane Warne. Do you? Shane Warne admitted in his last mainstream media interview before he died that he spent the last 15 years of his life apologising to his children. And we uphold the hero, the captain of the Cronulla Sharks years ago, who scored the winning try in the grand finals full-time siren. Chaired off the field, goes to the Leagues Club with the rest of the team, gets drunk celebrating, thinks his wife who's there with him is making a pass at his vice-captain, cracks a vodka bottle on the bar and sticks it in her face. A week later on the back page of the Telegraph, he's still a hero, but she's got 36 stitches in her face. Just another broken boy trying to be a man in a grown man's body. They're not heroes. But if you've worked a menial job for 30 years, just to come home smiling and happy every day because your best efforts are feeding and educating your children, you're a hero. But we won't see you on 60 Minutes, we won't see you on the King's Birthday Honours List, and we won't see you on the front or back page of the Telegraph. But you're holding this country together, make no mistake. You are. And if you're one of these guys who's walking down a footpath and you see kids beating up on another, teenagers beating up on another guy across the road, and you decide that the other guy's walking in front of you, looking into their mobile phones and talking and pretending because they don't want to be involved, and you make sure your phone's in your pocket and you cross the road and you don't know whether you're going to get stuck in the throat by a knife or not, but you're going because that can't happen on your watch, you're a hero. If you lace on your boots and go to a rally, you're a hero. If you write to local government and the politicians and you write to whoever else you need to write to get some action, you're a hero. If you turn up at these meetings, you're a hero, male or female. You're all designed to be heroes. But we've got to live into that new version of hero, and that's based on honour and integrity. And the best version of the word honour I've ever heard was in a movie called Rob Roy. Liam Neeson played the part of the Scottish hero, Rob Roy McGregor. And in one scene, he's sitting in the heather on the hills of Scotland, having a picnic with his wife and his 6-year-old and 3-year-old boy. And the oldest boy says to him, "Pa, what is honour?" "Ah, honour, son. Honour is a gift a man gives himself. It's what no man can give you and none can take away." "What about kings, pa? Do kings have honour?" "Ah, all men with honour are kings, but not all kings have honour." Ain't that the truth? "How do you know if you're getting it, pa?" "Ah, never worry in the getting of it, it just grows in you. You feel it." "And what about women, pa? Do women have honour?" "Ah, women have a heart of honour, and we must nurture and protect it in them. You must never sit by and see a man malign a woman or allow another to do so." That's beautiful. That's at the seat of every man's heart. And when a man lives in honour and integrity, recognising his destiny, doing the job that God gave him to do, built in the image of God, he creates an environment where his women and children flourish in peace and safety. And the women love it when men are like that. Society today will tell you that's sexist rubbish, but it's not. The people who say it's sexist rubbish are the people that didn't live in that vein. They didn't experience that. They need to experience that. This whole sexism and transgenderism, it's all rubbish disguising the fact that we've all been broken down deliberately to allow the New World Order and the global elite to control us through fear, because when a family unit is rock solid, they feel safe. When the kids are in bed at night at midnight and they hear a knock on the door, they go back to sleep because they know if anyone's coming for them, they've got to go through Daddy first. It's within our grasp. We can do it. We must do it. So in the vein of everything I've just said, if there's any man who wants to step into the breach with me, as I've made this call at 184 other villages around the country, come and form a line around the front of the stage. I'm not forming an army, I'm not forming a militia, I'm not going to do bayonet training and build Molotov cocktails. Well, want you guys all to turn around and face everybody. Now, moving close enough to one another so you can put your arms around each other. I want to see an unbroken chain. Let me see it through. Oops, sorry.
Extra.
I'll just see it through. Squeeze in.
That was the best place for you. Where are the short bloke?
Oh, wow. Does that look good? How good is that? This is rebuilding the spirit of Australia. Now, if there are any women in this audience who are related to any of these men, I want you to go up and join them. They need your encouragement. That's all right, darling. You want me to wheel you up?
Bring us a couple up.
Make sure you go to the right husband.
Come on,
Good on you. Now, don't feel left out if you're still sitting down because we haven't finished yet. Now, you're all with the right husbands, aren't you? That's good.
Lights are still on.
Wow. Wow, that is very, very impressive. Good on you. And how does that look to the rest of you? Wow. Now, if that looks good to you and you want to be in a community that's built like that, then I ask all of you to go up and join them. Because what we're building is community.
No, sorry.
That's right. Maybe
Change your colour and nothing.
people are forming computers on this.
Amy came up with my partner.
Wow. That's right. Moving close together.
That's the only reason they came up.
Tell them where are you?
Sorry for invading your personal space.
That's right. Can't leave you alone.
One on the only people standing alone.
That's the only reason I came up with she could come up. Because I came up because she could come up. What's wrong with you? Just the way down there.
Look at that. Oh wow, look, I know photos are being taken, but this is sensational. Now, I want you all to make eye contact with each other. Look around, turn around, look people in the eye. Don't be afraid. Wow, what a community. Okay, now a lot of you have never met before, but now you're a community. Now you can recognise one another. When you see each other in the streets, you'll remember this night, you won't forget it. And what you've just looked at is community. And the other thing you've looked at is victory. Because this is how we defeat fear, this is how we rise against the global elite, and this is what makes them quake in their boots. And God bless you all. Dear Lord Father in heaven, as we look upon each other, knowing that in us beats a heart that is pure. It may be damaged and scarred, but it's still pure. We're all created in your image, and you have a plan for each and every one of us. Strengthen our community, strengthen our resolve. Help us to forgive one another and forget, and let us move forward as people answerable to each other and answerable to you. We pray in the precious name of Jesus, and I hope everyone says, Amen. We're not finished yet, so thank you. Now please go back to your seats. Thank you. A couple more minutes.